Hello and Happy New Year. You've tuned to this week's episode of Next Steps Forward, and I'm your host, Chris Meek. As always, it's an honor to have you with us. Next Steps Forward is committed to helping others achieve more than ever while experiencing greater personal empowerment and well-being. Our special guest today is Michelle Curran. Michelle is a former U.S. Air Force fighter pilot and was just the second woman to fly lead solo for the air demonstration squadron, the Thunderbirds. Michelle Curran, whose call sign is MACE, also logged nearly 2,000 fighter jet hours and flew combat missions in Afghanistan. She left active duty in 2022 to found Upside Down Dreams, an organization that helps empower individuals to shift how they view fear, overcome self-doubt, and build trust to create high-performing teams. Michelle is also the author of, no surprise, The Flipside, a USA Today bestselling book in which she explains how fighter pilots manage fear under real pressure and how those same skills can help others overcome the fears that hold them back. Michelle Mace Curran, welcome to Next Steps Forward.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. Happy New Year to you and your family. And we're just talking, I hope you have your jet lag from your trip to Thailand. So hope you had a great time over there.
Yeah, absolutely. It was kind of the end of the year, wrap it up with a little R&R time with my family. And now it's time to hit the ground running for 2026.
What was the best part of the trip?
Oh man, we stayed in a national park on the middle of this incredible lake and a floating resort with only 14 floating rooms. And it's just surrounded by like these 1,000 plus foot tall limestone cliffs. Incredible.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. Well, we're glad you got some time with us. So thank you for that. I know how busy you are. So this is always one of the favorite stories that people like to start with the fighter pilots. Fighter pilots have call signs, which typically reflect personality traits, physical characteristics, specific incidents, or humorous stories. You know, we all know about Top Gun. There was Maverick, Iceman, Viper, and of course, Hollywood, to name a few. How'd you end up with the call sign MACE?
It's good to get this question out of the way right off the bat because everyone always asks me this. And I think Top Gun didn't do a good job of explaining how we get our call signs, that they're not something we pick. And yes, they sound cool, but usually the story behind them wasn't so cool at the time. So mine came from my first fighter squadron. So I went through all my training and then I finally get sent off to the Combat Air Force and I go off to Misawa, Japan, and I'm a brand new lieutenant. I am qualified to fly the F-16, but I'm still really bad because I'm just brand new. There's so much to learn. My second flight in country there was what we call BFM, but what you would know as dogfighting. So it's a standard training mission that we do. Is of course not in a combat situation. My instructor from the squadron, who's more experienced than I am, is in the other jet. We don't have live weapons loaded up, but we're going out and we're going to simulate that I'm the good guy, he's the bad guy. My whole goal in life is to get behind his aircraft and employ the gun against him. So that is my singular goal for the day. And I do everything I've been taught to do that, but I learned very basic habit patterns at that point because, again, I'm very inexperienced. And so all of my decisions are very binary. Like if I see A, I do B. If A looks different than normal, I still do B because I just don't have the ability to think on my feet yet. And mind you, we're going, 500 miles an hour. We're above 10,000 feet in the air. That's our floor that day. And the F-16, which makes it kind of unique to some other jets, is just how high of a G tolerance the aircraft can handle. And really, it's the limitation of the pilot that puts a cap on things. And so we would regularly pull 9 Gs, which is 9 times the force of gravity. So anyone listening, however much you weigh, multiply that by 9. That is the force you feel like you weigh under 9 Gs. So it is no joke. There's a lot of risk there. You can pass out from a G-induced loss of consciousness because the blood gets flushed out of your head. It just hurts all your joints. Everyone thinks it's this cool thing they want to experience. It is not fun. It's painful. Maybe like 6 Gs is a cool thing you want to experience. 9 is just not fun at all. So all that being said, we go out, we start the fight, and like I had learned in training, I pushed my throttle all the way up, lit my afterburner. So I'm full thrust, whatever the jet will give me. And then I'm like, cool, did that step. I can leave that throttle there, not think about it anymore, and worry about the 1,000 other things I need to worry about. So I did that. I, drive straight for a few seconds, roll, pull, try to point at my instructor who's now turning away from me, trying to get away. And I immediately hit 9 Gs. And then I end up holding it for much, much longer than I feel like I should be. So my mental timer is going. I'm not counting how long this is, but there's a certain point where you'll be under 9 Gs. You're ready for that. But when it's been 10 seconds, when it's been 15 seconds, you're like, I'm getting really tired. Why am I still at 9 Gs? Why is this not ending? And this whole time I'm trying to point at my instructor to gun him, and I'm just not getting anywhere close to pointing at him. So I just keep pulling and pulling. And soon as I start to get tired, as my G strain, which is this unique breathing technique we do to combat the G forces to try to stay awake and help push that blood back into your head, as that starts to get fatigued, I start to get light loss. So that first comes in the form of gray out, and then tunnel vision. And then very quickly, I have full light loss. So I have a blackout, but I'm still conscious. So I'm still aware that I'm flying a jet. I can still hear things, but I can't see anything besides blackness. And I still haven't gunned my instructor. Minor detail at this point. So all that's happening, and give me some separation, some experience, and some wisdom. Now I would ease off and make adjustments well before I let it get to that point. But at that point, being young and dumb and feeling like I really needed to prove myself, I was willing to walk that knife's edge of a G-lock to try to win this fight and prove myself in that squadron that I was new to. And obviously a G-lock in a single seat aircraft can have catastrophic results, and it has in the past for other F-16 pilots. So the only thing I think that saved me from pushing it further than that point was at that point where I had full light loss, my instructor realized that I should have definitely pointed at him by then, and something wasn't going right. So he made a call to knock it off on the radio, which was like our brevity comm, like, hey, something's wrong. We need to end this. So I hear that, pull back the throttle, jet slows down, G's drop, vision comes back, and exciting, stressful story, but ultimately I'm fine. I'm still in the air. I'm still flying the jet. Once you stop pulling the G's, the blood comes back to your brain, and you're really okay. You feel like a little bit confused. You're definitely out of breath. It feels like you just did a workout, but I'm fine. So we go back, we land, and we go to debrief, which is something that we always do. And we pull up the recordings from our cockpit, what we call the tapes, and we start watching them. And the first thing that he notices, that he calls out as the instructor, is as he listens to my G strain under those 9 Gs that I hold forever, he's like, dang, you sound like you're starting to get tired. Are you getting any light loss? And so we started to dig into like, oh, okay, you're pushing it too far. You're too close to a G-lock. So then we go back and look in more detail at what led up to that. Turns out I lit the afterburner, push the throttle all the way up, done that, left it there and not worried about it anymore. And because I was flying in December in northern Japan, where it was very cold, which means a jet engine performs better than it does in warm temperatures. Mind you, I had learned to fly in Phoenix in the summer. The jet went past the speed of sound, so it's now supersonic, before I even roll and pull back on the stick. And that sounds cool to like your layman from the outside. But when the jet's going that fast, A, you have a ton of energy, so you can hold 9 Gs forever. And B, your turn circle, so the circle you're flying in the sky is too large to turn tight enough to point at the other jet and gun him. It's like trying to turn your car into a driveway where you need to be going 30 miles an hour and you're going 60. You're going to overshoot it. And so they named me based on that MACE, which stands for Mach at Circle Entry. So Mach for breaking the speed of sound. And then circle entry is just the maneuver I was trying to do when I rolled and pulled back on the stick. The 9 Gs forever near G-lock is part of that story. It's not really reflected in the acronym, but the whole thing, took maybe 2 minutes of my life, but it is something I'll never forget. And I still go by my call sign today, 15 years later.
That's an amazing story. And thank you for sharing that. There's a lot to that. Thanks for putting it in layman's terms for us. And as you're saying that, I'm thinking one of the first guests I had in the show 5 years ago was the former instructor at the Top Gun school. And his name was Guy Bus Snodgrass. And when I asked him how he got his call sign, he never told me the story. He just told me like, it's something of how, kind of you go through something, but he never actually shared the story of how he got it. So I have to follow up with him because he just didn't want to tell us now. So
oh yeah,
I appreciate you sharing that, because I know sometimes it might be a little too personal, and so I think his might be. And so, so Bus, if you're out there listening, I'm going to give you a call and get you back on here to tell us, because Mace just told us her story.
Sorry, Bus.
She threw you under that bus.
Yeah, exactly.
So Michelle, let's back up a bit. You grew up in Wisconsin. When did you have your first flight? Was it a commercial flight, general aviation? And did you have an epiphany that made you say, I want to fly Air Force jets?
So I grew up in a small town, northern Wisconsin, not an aviation family, not a military family. So I didn't have exposure to that side of aviation. I was always really an adventurous, driven kid. And I remember my first flight very well, which was commercial. And I remember it because like I said, small town in Wisconsin, 4,000 people, rural area, farming community. My uncle was getting married, and he decided that they were going to get married in Las Vegas, which is where I live right now. So that's why it's kind of funny. And my mom was going to the wedding, and I was in 3rd grade at the time. And I was so heartbroken that I didn't get to go. I was just like, I literally cried because I didn't get to go. And then Christmas morning came around, and I opened this box under the tree, and it had a little American Airlines jet and a little Las Vegas set of dice. And that was the surprise, that I actually got to go with my mom to Las Vegas for the wedding. And so that was my first commercial flight, was from Minneapolis to Vegas, 3rd grade. And my mom has one very blurry, poor lighting photo of me sitting by the window on takeoff. And you can see like the snow outside, because I think it was in like February. And I'm just like, big smile on my face, big eyes, terrible bowl haircut. And that was the first time. And I loved it. But it didn't occur to me at that point, as a, 8, 9-year-old, that it was something I could do for a living. I definitely didn't connect those dots until much later.
I love how she gave you the gift. That's brilliant.
Yeah. And then I felt like a little jerk because I had just thrown a fit right before that, and this present was coming. It was a good lesson on multiple fronts.
Mom's always right. Many exceptional leaders point to a parent, a coach, or teacher who ignited or nurtured a life-changing passion. Who played that role for you, and how they nurture what still has to be considered a very unusual career path for a young woman?
Yeah, I think both of my parents always were a good balance of pushing me towards my potential, especially academically, with also being like, we don't have any expectations of what you're going to go do. We just want you to go do what you're capable of, whatever that looks like for you, right? Like, we want you to chase your dream. And they, very humble beginnings. We didn't have a lot of extra income to do fancy vacations and that kind of thing. But in the summers, especially as I got a little bit older, they would take me to do things that really nurtured whatever my dream was at that time. And so there was a stint where I wanted to be an archaeologist. I think it was right after Jurassic Park was like such a big thing. I was like, that looks so cool. So they sent me to UW La Crosse to go to archaeology camp for a week. It was really hot, really dirty, and I didn't find anything. And that changed my mind that I didn't want to be an archaeologist anymore. And then there was a point where I really was into criminology and criminal justice, and I wanted to be a detective, and I wanted to be an FBI agent, which actually is what I went into college wanting to be, as a criminal justice major. And so I went to a criminology camp in the northern peninsula of Upper Michigan, or in the Upper Peninsula. So they really were good about prioritizing, letting me explore those things. And then the other piece of that was my dad's biggest hobby when I was growing up, and still now as he's retired, is hunting, right? It's northern Wisconsin. It's a huge thing, especially deer hunting. And my brother, also a huge hunter, but he's 9 years older than me. So he's out of the house at that point. And so as I got to the age, 12, 13 years old, where I could legally go along and go hunting, my dad included me with this hunting crew that was all men, like I was just one of the guys. And before I could even, carry my own rifle and have a tag, I walked along with him when I was like 7, 8 years old, traipsing through the woods and snow, dealing with the discomfort of being tired and post holing when you're not that tall and being cold. And I think that both, helped foster that feeling of excitement and adventure and love for the outdoors that I still have now, but also that like grit and perseverance to slog along and be like, oh, I can do hard things. And it also made me pretty comfortable in male dominated environments where I was like, oh, I can walk in this room and that's not a big deal. And so that was a long answer, but I think my parents did multiple things right.
We're going to get to that male dominant part in a second here, but I didn't realize you went to UW lacrosse.
So I went there for a camp. I went to the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul for my undergrad.
Are you from the lacrosse area?
I'm like 2.5 hours from there. I'm more in like the central part of the state.
Okay. I only asked because every year for my nonprofit, there's a company there called Multistack, an HVAC company. And we go to lacrosse, and I stayed at a great hotel called the Charmant, and there's a restaurant called the Waterfront. And so I know lacrosse very well. So it's a very small world because it's a very, very small town.
It is. It's beautiful though, especially in the summer. Right
on the Mississippi. It's spectacular. So little plug there for the Charmant Hotel and the Waterfront restaurant. So we'll see you guys in August in the next golf tournament. So did you actually have a pilot's license before joining the Air Force?
No, and I hadn't done really any general aviation flying at all. I think so I'm already an Air Force ROTC. I end up trying to get an Air Force scholarship. I'm like a junior in high school and I have good grades. My parents don't have a college fund for me. So we start to talk about scholarship opportunities. And that's how I end up really looking into the military in the first place. So I of the branches, I'm like, Air Force sounds the most exciting, not because I want to be a pilot at that point, but just because there's something about aviation that seems to align with this just like adventurous side I have, this exploration side I have. So I go after Air Force scholarship. I get one, go to college as a criminal justice major, planning on doing 4 years in the military to pay back my scholarship, and then getting out and trying to become an FBI agent. That was still what I wanted to do at that point. So because of that, I wasn't pursuing aviation in any form. And I think I did one discovery flight when I was maybe a sophomore or a freshman or sophomore in college already, where I got to fly around the Twin Cities, St. Paul area with another cadet, got a little bit of time at the controls. And I do remember that instructor was an older gentleman who probably had a crazy amount of hours and I'd been doing it for like 30 years. I just was like staring at my attitude indicator in these turns. And he's like, wow, that was a great, like you held your altitude. That was a great level turn. Are you sure you haven't done this before? And for him, that was probably like just a very off the cuff comment because he probably takes students up or kids up all the time. But I remember that like sticking with me and being like, oh, maybe I have an aptitude to be a pilot. Doing one left turn is not really a great litmus test that you can be a fighter pilot. But those little things, those little votes of confidence, I think really matter when you're in that point of, not being sure if it's something you want to do or can do. And so when I actually went to pilot training, when I got my pilot slot at the end of my 4 years in ROTC, graduating college, I had logged 0 hours. So no.
So you go from being an FBI agent to a combat pilot and then lead for the Thunderbirds.
Yeah, lead solo. And I never thought that would happen. I definitely did not believe I was good enough to be part of that team for most of, the first half of my career.
We're going to get to that also. And did your parents support you becoming a pilot in a male-dominated field like that?
They were always very patriotic, very proud that I was, going to the military, very proud that I was doing something that's, considered very elite, I guess, fighter aviation. I think, now, especially my mom seeing me fly when I got to the Thunderbirds, it was very stressful from a mom's perspective. And she like openly said when I left that she was glad that chapter was done. But that's like the normal level of I won't worry about my child's safety, but they were always very supportive.
Worrying about your child's safety is one thing. My kid gets in the school bus every morning, but flying at 9Gs is totally different. So I can understand where your mother's point of view was on that one.
Yeah.
So your path from Wisconsin to the cockpit of an Air Force jet obviously couldn't have been easy. What were the toughest setbacks you faced, and how did you build the resilience to overcome them?
I feel like I stumbled through that so much. I wish I had all the tools I have now and the tools I try to teach other people. But I was just so much in my little bubble of Air Force training that I didn't have any perspective to reach out for mentorship or read a self-help book or anything like that. I think there were 2 points that really stick out. It was when I very, very first joined the aviation part of the Air Force. So initial flight screening, where you go and fly a DA-20 super small airplane. You go to Pueblo, Colorado and do that. And that is where they get you through solo. And that is also, it's screening as part of the name of it, because they're trying to weed out people who don't have the aptitude before they move them into more expensive, resource heavy aircraft. So the whole point there is to kind of get rid of people who aren't going to be able to make it. And you know that. And coming in with no flight experience, not a technical degree. So I wasn't an aeronautical engineering major. I wasn't an engineering major at all. I didn't understand lift or drag or the oil system or hydraulic system. All of that was 100% new to me. Drinking from a fire hose is an understatement. It was so overwhelming that I was only there for, I think, just under 4 weeks. And I think somewhere in week 1 or 2, as we're getting all of this information crammed into our heads, and we're having to, recite it and regurgitate it on the spot in front of people. So there's a stress level there too. I remember one night in particular, it's like 11:30 p.m. and I have to be up at 5 a.m. to do a simulator or something. And I just hit a breaking point. I remember I just got that hopeless feeling of there's no way I'm going to be able to do this. And then I went to sleep and my alarm went off the next morning and I went and continued to slog away. And there was no magic epiphany that I had to get through that phase. It was just one foot in front of the other. And when I left that program and we had to go around and get all our flight commanders and instructors to sign off before we left, I remember my flight commander saying, "Great job. You did an awesome job in the program." And I was shocked because the entire time I felt like I was hanging on by a thread. But I guess that's the whole point. So that was phase 1. And then I really actually enjoyed pilot training. It is stressful. It is intense, but it was also so fun and so exciting. But then I get to my first combat squadron after doing pilot training, doing F-16 training, and then again, drinking from a fire hose, because now it's all the tactics. And again, it's super technical. It is all about beeps and squeaks and radars and how they work. And all of that was brand new to me again. So I very much felt that same feeling of overwhelm that I had felt at the beginning.
So I've got one last question for you. You talk about combat before we head to the break. And I totally don't believe in this, but a lot of people still believe that U.S. servicewomen are kept out of combat, even though that hasn't been true for years. What do you wish the public understood about women's roles in combat theaters, and especially combat aviation, and why?
Yeah. This is a great time to talk about this because it's very much in the news lately. There are no lowered standards for women in combat situations, like the combat career fields. And people will always reference the military physical fitness tests because there are 2 separate score charts for men and women. And we could go down a whole rabbit hole of whether we think that should be changed or it is what it is right now. So yes, for a woman to get a 95% on her physical fitness test for general Air Force, the time she has to run is slower than a guy to get a 95%. You get into the more elite, high screening fields that are in combat front lines, combat aviation in particular. And there are other things in place that are not gender-based at all that screen people out. Flight standards, there's nothing they're unrelated to gender. Check ride standards, deviation standards. Oh, plus or minus 5 knots of airspeed, plus or minus 100 feet of altitude. It's so black and white laid out. There's not much discretion even on the check rides. It's either you did it or you didn't, and it's filmed. It's on it's on our tape review. So flight standards, check ride standards, all of that is the same. And then when you get to the physical strength aspect, it's not really a factor in the jet because man or woman can pull back on the stick for the 20 pounds of force required to get max deflection. Often it's shorter stature handles G-forces better because the blood has less distance to flow. So women tend to be shorter. So sometimes that means that a smaller woman can handle G's better than a taller man. But that's, again, not necessarily gender. It's just size. And then when I came through, we had the fighter aircrew test, which is weightlifting. It's a physical fitness test. It's bench press and deadlift and squat, all these things. And every lift you have to do is a percentage of your body weight. So it does not matter male or female. It's just how much you weigh. They're cool, you got to do this many reps at this percentage of your body weight. And so I think that nuanced discussion has been lost a lot lately. And there's just this tribe out there being like, standards have been lowered. It's not fair. Like, it's hurting our combat readiness. It's just not a thing. So, like, we can talk about effectiveness and standards all we want for any combat role and how they should be enforced and how they should reflect the demands of the job. I think everyone's on board with that. And I think we've just lost the narrative a little bit lately. And there have been so many amazing women that have done incredible things in combat. And it's sad to see their legacies kind of just get lost in the shuffle.
I appreciate you clarifying that. And I've had the honor of meeting both Heather Penny and Allison Black, who are just rock stars in female aviation. And so thank you for that. And we've been talking to former Air Force fighter pilot Michelle MACE Curran. We'll be right back after a short break. Don't go anywhere. And we are back. I'm Chris Meek, host of Next Steps Forward. And my guest today is Michelle Curran. Michelle's a former U.S. Air Force fighter pilot and lead solo of the Air Demonstration Squadron, the Thunderbirds. She's also logged nearly 2,000 hours flying fighter jets and flew combat missions in Afghanistan. She left active duty in 2022 to found Upside Down Dreams, with the goal of empowering individuals to shift how they view fear, overcome self-doubt, and build trust to create high-performing teams. Michelle is also the author of the best-selling book, The Flipside. Michelle, we were talking for the break about how you joined the Thunderbirds. The pilot who flies in your position is known as number 5, the lead solo. What did that role require of you that was different from the other pilots on the team?
Yeah, so when I first got hired, my first year on the team, which was the 2019 air show season, I came in as number 6, the posing solo, which is normal. That's always how you get hired as a solo pilot, to get that year of experience. And then your second year, you move into that lead solo role and you become number 5. And number 5 versus number 6. So anyone that's seen the demo, we do the head-on passes. That looks like a high-speed game of chicken. We do all the individual aerobatic maneuvers. So the max turn where you'd hit 9 Gs, the vertical rolls where you'd climb from 150 feet above the ground to 15,000 feet in a few seconds. You really are, your job is to really show the max performance of the F-16, where the other 4 jets, what we call the Diamond, they're almost always in close formation, and they're really able to show like the precision and the grace. And it's like really more beautiful, loops and rolls and that kind of thing. So kind of different elements of the team to just showcase the whole spectrum of what we can do. So as the lead solo, I was in charge of those 2 jets. So I was in charge of all the timing, which was probably one of the more challenging things. To have the 2 jets pass each other head on right at show center in front of the crowd takes incredible timing coordination. When we're each going 500 miles an hour, if we are off by half a second, we're significantly off our center point. And same with the altitude. If we're off, the optics not going to look right for the crowd. So I was also in charge of a lot more of the communications between myself and number 6, the solos, and the boss who's leading the diamond and who leads all 6 jets when we're together. And so there's just a lot more leadership kind of roles, and any coordination that's going on between the diamond and the solos is really happening between Thunderbird 1, who we call the boss, and the lead solo number 5.
I love learning all this stuff. It's fascinating to me how you guys do all this stuff. The Thunderbirds obviously are more than a flying team. As you mentioned, it's high trust, high performance, precision organization, in which there is zero room for error. Every pilot on the team has to fly, as you mentioned, within inches or less of one another at 350, 400 miles per hour or faster. One mistake, as you mentioned, half a second can kill 1 or more members. And sadly, that's exactly what happened in 1982 when an accident known as the Diamond Crash took the lives of 4 pilots. How do you build so much trust in other pilots, and what lessons can the rest of us learn from that?
Yeah, and the Diamond Crash, even though it's been so long, is still so entrenched in the squadron. And when you show up, you learn all about it. And every year on the anniversary, we all get together and we talk about it. And we give, a toast. There's a massive oil painting of the pilots who were lost right at the top of the staircase that we walked down every single day we left our offices to go down to fly. So there's the memorial of those pilots and the loss of life, but there's also it's a reminder of the seriousness of what we do. And it's for entertainment at these air shows. And so it can kind of get glossed over as like, oh, it's loops to music, but it is extremely high stakes and low margin for error. It's the highest risk flying I did my entire career, without a doubt. And so that trust gets created very quickly because, those 6 pilots that you see in the jets that actually are flying in the demo, half of them are new every winter training season. So the air show season wraps up in November, and already there are 3 new pilots, taking half of those demo spots. And so you go from November to the first air show in March, and that's not a long time to build their skill level, to learn all of these new maneuvers and just new type of flying that they're not used to, and B, to create trust to the level of we would be all together in the Delta, which is all 6 of us, flying a loop. And I'm staring at the number 2 pilot who's next to me, and I'm just staring at his wingtip, trying to line it up with the right formation references. And I also see the back of his helmet because he's looking to his right, staring at boss's jet doing the same thing. And then the opposite is true on the right side of the formation. They're both looking left. And the Diamond Crash is a great, reference for this because the boss is the only one that knows our altitude, our airspeed, our attitude. And so we're pointing straight at the ground, at a point in that loop as we pull through the horizon, and none of us are looking forward except for him. And so it's a great representation of leadership and followership. And I think that trust is built in a few key ways. One is that there's a very clear common mission, and we all understand the importance of our role in it. And for the pilots, it's pretty obvious, but there's a big effort on the team to make sure every person understands how essential they are, all the way down to the public affairs people and the communications people and the people in supply. And everyone is bought in that common mission and gets how they contribute. And then I think for the pilots specifically, one of the biggest things is through just the really regimented debrief routine that we have. So we would go fly a flight, and whether it was the most simple flight, whether it was across country, taking the jets from Las Vegas where the team is based to maybe California for an air show, it's a short flight, uneventful, or it was a very complex air show situation or something went wrong that was unexpected, we debriefed every single time, no matter what. And that debrief was usually longer than the flight itself. And we looked into what went well so we could make sure we replicated that in the future. And then a great portion of that time is spent on looking at any errors. And these aren't usually massive errors because you're experienced fighter pilot at that point. We do very building block training to step people, down in altitude, closer in proximity to other aircraft in a way that can be done safely. So these aren't life or death errors most of the time, although those occasionally do happen. But these are tiny errors, and even the tiniest little mistake, oh, you were off a second on your timing. You missed one word in that radio call. Your G onset rate was faster than it should have been. So the loop looked like an egg instead of a circle. Like any of that little stuff is just talked about without trying to blame or shame the person. It's just like, oh, hey, we see this in the tapes. What happened there? Like, what were you thinking about? Was it a communication issue? Was it, you didn't have all the information, or you had all the information and you still made the wrong decision, or you made the wrong choice consciously, or, like there's so many things you can get into. And it doesn't matter if you are the brand new wingman to the team and you've been there 2 months, or you're Thunderbird 1 and it's your second season and you're not only leading the demo, but you're also the squadron commander for all 130 people that make up the team. Your errors are talked about the same. And so that creates this psychological safety where this isn't a thing to shame a new person, even though they're going to be making more mistakes than the experienced people, because that's just how learning works. It's about accountability. It's about ownership. And it's just this constant feedback loop. And it's just what you do. It's just normal. So feedback doesn't have this negative connotation with it that people shy away from, because it is just what we do, regardless of whether we crushed it or we messed things up. And I think that is the foundation to building that trust.
It's fascinating to me that you started your response to that question by saying flying the Thunderbirds was the most dangerous flying you've done.
Yeah, for sure.
But you've done combat flying.
Yep.
That's mind-boggling to me.
I think it would be maybe a different situation if we were in a combat situation with like a near peer adversary that had very capable fighter aircraft, or very capable surface-to-air missiles. I went to Afghanistan, right? And so, the Taliban just doesn't have those resources. And so we owned the airspace. So our biggest threat there was terrain, because there are very tall mountains. And a lot of times you're doing attacks at night and you're rolling in and diving towards the ground into this black abyss. And there's a 20,000 foot mountain, next to you. That is definitely the most dangerous thing. And then some mechanical failure and having to eject into hostile territory is still a factor there. But the threats to the aircraft themselves are very low in the combat environment I was part of. And so I think, take that with a grain of salt. Combat can be extremely dangerous for fighter pilots. It just wasn't in the area that I was operating in.
You talked about a lot of the factors that lead into the trust that you build within the squadron. What leadership lesson from your time with the Thunderbirds has stuck with you the most?
I do really think that it is that the leader being willing to admit they don't have all the answers, and creating that collaborative environment where the people on the team who are the subject matter experts can really be like nurtured to thrive in their roles and in their expertise that they have, and they can be empowered to speak up. And even if that means correcting the boss, and even if that means that I think there's a stereotype maybe outside of the military that not having all the answers is weakness. And I think that's like one of the most common traps that new leaders can fall into, is just being like, oh, I'll figure it out on my own, or I'm going to pretend I have it all together. But there's this balance between authority and assertiveness and confidence with vulnerability and letting people connect with you at a human level, and also empowering them to step in and fill the gaps that they might be more equipped to fill than you are alone.
All right, let's talk about the part of your career where your feet are now on the ground. When did you start thinking, maybe it's time for my next chapter? Was it a single moment or a gradual realization?
It was gradually through my time with the Thunderbirds. Several things happened during that assignment that, contributed to my decision to ultimately step away from the Air Force and leave the cockpit. One of them was how aggressive the flying is on that assignment. I was hitting 8-9 Gs every day, multiple times a day for 3 years straight. And I had a lot of back pain because of it. There's just a lot of wear and tear on your body. And I went into that assignment in the best shape I've ever been in my life. I was doing marathons. I had done an ultra. I was climbing mountains. I just felt so good. And I left that assignment with knees that had problems, with a lower back that hurt every day. And I was just seeing that it wasn't worth it for me to continue to fly at that level and then be 60 years old and not be able to go on a hike. So that was a priority for me. I was just really tired of being in pain all of the time. I also had met my husband here in Las Vegas, my first year on the team. We had gotten married. I had a new stepson who was 6 at the time. And that just shifts your priorities. It shifts your ability to move around at the Air Force's direction every 2 to 3 years. They were very established here in Vegas. My stepson's mom is here. And so that became a factor. And then the biggest thing, and what I think informed what I went on to do now, is that during my time on the Thunderbirds, the flying was initially all of my attention because it was so challenging. All I could do was focus on that and try to learn it. Then I eventually got fairly comfortable with it. And I started to have more bandwidth to enjoy the other parts of the job, which were really interacting with people, the inspiration side of it, doing interviews, doing these autograph lines after an air show where a parent would drag their daughter up and you would see this little girl connect the dots that someone that looked like her just did this thing that seemed superhero-esque. And you would see that little girl's eyes light up and that what she saw as possible for her in the world just grew in that moment in front of your eyes. And that became the best part of the job. It became way more rewarding than the flying. And by my 3rd year, I ended up doing a bonus year. Normally it's 2, but because of the pandemic, they asked us all to stay. So by my 3rd year, I'm now very comfortable with the flying. And I am just loving getting to help empower other people. And I really wanted to figure out how I could continue to do that. And that combined with other things I mentioned, I just decided I needed to explore options outside of the Air Force where I could really lean into my story and all these things I wanted to talk about that no one is talking in a fighter squadron about being afraid or self-doubt or like questioning if you even deserve to be in the role that you're in. And I was like, coming from the background that I have with the platform that I have, being willing to talk about these human, relatable, vulnerable topics, I see an appetite for that and just an ability to make an impact with it.
So you had a cape on as a superhero there for a young girl. Now you're a stepmom. We're going to go off script here, and I'm going to let you kind of take us through the last 5 or 6 minutes here. Let's talk about your book, The Flipside, and the work that you're doing. You talked about managing fear. You talked about helping others, take action that would help them, that would previously paralyze them. You said that there are 5 lessons in the book that came directly from mistakes that you made in the cockpit. We want people obviously to buy your book. So before we start talking about it, where can people find you and find your book?
Yeah, I'm very easy to find online. MACECurran.com. So call sign last name is my website. I'm on Instagram, Mace_Curran. I'm on LinkedIn, Michelle Mace Curran. I put a ton of little like bite-sized pieces of kind of this thought leadership stuff about self-doubt, about fear, about confidence, about leadership out on those platforms. The book is available at all major bookstores, at Barnes and Noble. It's still in several airports at Hudson News, but Amazon also is where most people buy from, and you can definitely find it there.
So your first lesson, fear is intel. What's the difference between fear that protects us and fear that paralyzes us?
I think most of us just feel afraid and we don't dig deeper into it, and we let that physical feeling of fear inform our decisions more than it probably should. And, we are hardwired to avoid fear. Fear is something that kept us alive, especially back in times where there were a lot of threats to us, right? We're a caveman, there's a saber-toothed tiger. You better be afraid when you hear something outside your cave, right? It might be a squirrel, but let's bias towards being afraid and assume it's a tiger. And so that negativity bias where we kind of think the worst case scenario, or we dwell on negatives over positives, that has stuck with us in our human brains. as well as our response to fear. And most of us are not facing actual physical danger on a regular basis. And I realized that in the cockpit, I actually was, which I think helped give me perspective on this in general. And I have a few different things that I think can highlight the difference between real fear and imagined fear. And when I say imagined fear, I don't mean that it doesn't feel real. I don't mean that it's an overreaction or that you're weak if you experience it. It's very normal. I just want to say that that's the fear we create in our own minds versus the fear that comes from an external threat. And a pivotal point for me was in pilot training, going through altitude chamber training, which was very early in the program. Really, I think one of my first times, if not the first time, wearing the full helmet with the oxygen mask bayoneted onto it. And you're in this chamber and it pressurizes and you go up to altitude and then you take the mask off, and it's just so you can experience hypoxia, where you just don't have enough oxygen in your brain, so that you can recognize what your symptoms are, your first symptoms, in case you experience it in the aircraft. So that's the whole point of it. But before we even get to the point of dropping the mask, I have this thing on my face, suctioned over, covers your nose, covers your mouth, and I feel like I'm suffocating. I am feeling extremely claustrophobic. I'm starting to breathe faster and faster, and I feel like I can't get enough air. And I am just in this mental war of, I have to make it through this training. It's something we have to do to be part of this program. I'm also in this metal tube with all of my classmates who I've just met. I'm the only woman in the class too. So there's like an added layer of being under a microscope with that. I'm like, I have to, what's wrong with me that I'm freaking out? I'm looking around at all my other classmates' eyeballs, because that's all you can see of each other's faces. And everyone looks like they're just chilling. And I am on the verge of panic. And long story short, I ended up being able to kind of calm myself down, slow my breathing, talk myself through that, and realize that it was all in my head. I was fine. I was not in any physical danger. And that experience really taught me about the power we have in between the moment where something happens that triggers fear and we choose how we respond to it. And I call that the space between. And the space between is where all of your training comes in, your preparation comes in. It's where your opportunity to lead comes in. It's where courage shows up. And when I recognized that, I was like, so that experience could have deterred me and made me scared to put the mask on in the jet, because I was going to have to wear it hundreds of times after that. But instead, it felt like it was very empowering, because I was like, wait a minute. Fear can just be a data point that I get to analyze and decide what I do with. It doesn't have to be this thing that's just like, stop what you're doing and retreat. And I think many of us view it that way. And so I'm kind of on a mission to give people perspective on that and give them the tools where they can interrupt the response versus react, and choose something that serves their long-term goals rather than just eliminates the fear as fast as possible.
And one more time, where can our listeners and viewers find you in your book?
Yeah, macecurran.com has everything. It's called The Flipside.
I love it. Michelle Mace Curran, author of The Flipside and former Thunderbird pilot, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for our audience for listening to us today. I'm Chris Meek. We're out of time. We'll see you next week, same time, same place. Until then, stay safe and keep taking your next steps forward.